July 7. It's kind of hard to believe we're a week into July. Summer's in full swing. But my name is Amalite, and I am your host of the Soulestic Intelligence podcast. And today we're going to be talking about careers, employment, and how that is affected by the internet and some of the big major changes that happened during COVID, which was I was listening to his podcast, the Biocharisma podcast, and so he had on a guy named Brian, and they were talking about demon, like removing demons, so kind of exorcism type stuff, and how, yesterday we were talking about the digital cathedral and how the digital cathedral requires sacrifices. So, they were talking about sacrifices and sacrificing for knowledge instead of earning it, um, you know, killing to get that knowledge. And, during the pandemic, that was a big major theme. So that was a really interesting kind of addition into some of the work that I'm doing. But in respect to the digital age series, so one of the common things, like I'm over on LinkedIn, I'm posting on LinkedIn, but I'm also reading stories, and I shared a story of, how AI was blackmailing some C-suite executives, and there's some other things that are going on, but it's kind of taking on this life of its own, which is really interesting. And I am all for the soul over the system. So when we look at systems, we don't want to break it down. One of the key factors here that I use as kind of the foundation to really anchor in that wisdom is that the saying, be in the world but not of it, is how we navigate it, right? So, what do I mean by that? If you're going into the digital labyrinth like I am, and hi Jaden, you're going into the digital labyrinth and you're looking at, how do I map this out? How do I share how we get out of this digital gulag or digital map or digital labyrinth, so to speak? Then we're looking at having our soul be in that. Jesus loves you. He does. Absolutely. Prince Marina, welcome. Oh, Susanna. Hello, Susanna. Emilio, welcome to the chat. So, if we're navigating this digital labyrinth, the the important piece is to remember to be. You can be in the world, you can be in the labyrinth, you can be in this digital cathedral, but not of it. Meaning that it doesn't take over your conviction, it doesn't take over your personal sovereignty and your connection to your divinity. And really what the system is a way to plug into something that is a little bit more like an external sovereignty. Like we sometimes we run away from ourselves to, I'm a Christian and I love God. Good. I like that. It's important. This is important. That's important for sure. So when we're looking at the technology world in general, what it is this external extension of almost this spiritual connection that we're looking for. And a lot of us, our default mode is to find something external to satisfy some sort of spiritual issue that we're dealing with on the inside. For example, if you're seeking a relationship, you're almost seeking, like looking at somebody else to see what you look like on the inside. Friends can do this, partners can do this, spouses can do this. even work to a certain degree can do this to you, where it like reveals pieces of yourself that you need to see or work on. It's like everybody is like this mirror for you to reveal parts of yourself. That's why if you don't do any of the shadow work, the trauma work, and look at some of the patterns in your life, you might just continuously go into the same relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and still it's like the same story, different person every time. And this could span over years and years. I am in the United States, in Oregon. So when we're looking at the digital cathedral, it's almost this, it's a cathedral. I called it a cathedral because there is some form of spiritual energy that's going into it. And as we're navigating this digital age, as we're navigating the soul over system mentality, we're really wanting to like become aware of what it really is. And a lot of the people are not getting to the actual heart of what this digital labyrinth is. And some people that are the anti-transhumanists are like, just go back to being analog and ignore it. And then you've got the pro that are like Elon, which is like, just give into it and otherwise you're obsolete. And these are really large thought leaders that are giving these pathways and making it seem like there's only these two options, when really there's always more options. So let's really dig into what happened with the careers, the jobs, the labor. We're going to go back in time to the industrial age and look at how the industrial age was. So the industrial age, we'll start there, is from the 1850s until about the 1970s. So that is a good chunk of time. It's not a lot of time compared to, time, like linear time over a long period of time. It's still a small chunk, but it is a large factor into identifying where we're going now. So we have to look at the past in order to see what's coming in the future. So what the industrial age was. So think the transcontinental railroad, meaning the railroad system was being built to go from one side of the United States to the other. They were trying to move a large amount of goods and a large amount of minerals throughout the system. So we got this really strong push for factory-based and on-site labor. They were bringing in people from China, so a lot of Chinese were building this transcontinental railroad. So the other thing that's coming into play is assembly lines. You're dealing with steel mills, mining, textiles. These are all these main core, I don't want to call it GDP, but main core products that they're pulling from the center of the United States and bringing them into different places. So, Philadelphia is really popular. I think their football team is the Steelers. So you can imagine that back in that time, in this era, this from the 1850s until the 1970s, that they're doing a lot of steel manufacturing. So they're, milling all this iron. They're using coal power, and we can play Minecraft and know that those things are like pretty good necessities to have until you get to diamonds, right? So they've kind of got this little function going on there as well. So the other thing that happened during this time is you had these predictable hours. So people would show up, 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and work until a certain period of time. but it was like norm. Every day you were doing this. And then it's repetitive tasks. So in the assembly lines, in the manufacturing process, everything is a repetitive task. So if you have a machine that you want to make, let's say it's a car, you have to have, similarity in and continuity in all of these pieces. So if you're making a Model T Ford, you're going to want to have the same doors. You're going to want to have the same frame. You're going to want to have, similar pieces that go into it. You have this model, and then all of the manufacturing lines are going up to make that model. So you're looking at this repetitive task function, versus before it was really apprenticey. So you would apprentice to maybe do tool making. So you're making swords or axes or pickaxes or whatever the thing that you're making. You're doing it, but it's likely just on a job by job basis. Whoever is paying for those materials, those tools that they want to use, they're coming to you as the expert in that, and or you're apprenticing to become a part of that. I remember reading about, Benjamin Franklin and his fascination with publications. And so, he was very much a big hand in that, especially with the foundation of libraries. So the public library that we have is, kind of this thought idea that Franklin had. So that just shows you the power of the apprenticeship mentality, but the industrial age really came in and shifted that into where these big manufacturing companies are now making all of the items. Same thing goes for textiles. Same thing goes for, the mining. So if you're mining, there's a little bit more automation that's going into that. You guys have probably heard the story of the coal miners. They have to send the canary down the coal mine to make sure that the air down there is good for them. So they would have this canary, and if it died, then they knew that the air was toxic and they needed to exit the mine. But now, with the industrial age, you're looking at the increase in the manufacturing abilities. You're looking at having a little bit more mechanized labor, so things that will come in and kind of do the work for them. So there's lots of improvements going on in the assembly, in the manufacturing process. The other thing about the industrial age labor is that physical presence is mandatory. You have to come in and clock in at a certain time, and you clock out at a certain time. You have to be there to make sure that the labor, whatever you're making, is has people to do that. And so labor at this time is time for pay. So, if you're giving a certain amount of labor, it's usually in hour long chunks, then you get paid for that amount of labor. It's not output based. It's not dependent on how many diamonds you extract from the mine, how much coal you extract from the mine. It's just you're there and you're doing these repetitive tasks, these processes that need to be done. The other thing that happened, and the other thing I highlight during this time, is the workers started these mass labor movements. They were starting unions, they were starting hierarchical structures. And, it wasn't until the 50s and 60s that the administrative work was kind of introduced into all of this. So, administrative work is paperwork and, phone calls and sales teams. It really didn't start until the 1950s, 60s. So if you really think about it, administrative work as we know it is relatively new. It wasn't necessarily around previously. And then in the beginning of the digital age, I was talking about the industrial age as far as these improvements to manufacturing, improvements to the work day, like what a work day would be considered. There was a lot of prior to that, there was a lot of abuse of labor. They would use prison labor to, they would pay them very, very little, but they would use prison labor to, complete their manufacturing needs. There was, contracts with the prisoners, and you've seen this if you've ever watched, Shawshank Redemption. The company came and they hired the prison laborers to come up onto the rooftop and tar the rooftops so that they didn't have to, and it was a really cheap option for them to in order to do that. So so you have these labor disputes. We want fair pay, we want to have 8-hour work days, 8 hour sleep, 8 hours of where we can kind of fill in and do what we need to do for our families and have that valuable time with our family. So the unions really were, I call it this emotional intelligence piece that was really being integrated into society at that time. So the unions were really just calling for fairness, fair labor, fair wages, fair treatment. And so it really started this human resource, you know, dialogue that was happening, and then having these representatives represent them in their whatever union they were. So if you were a plumber, you would have your plumbers union. If you're a steel worker, you'd have your steel workers union. Railroad, same thing, unions. So you have all these unions popping up, and the representatives are not just representing them to their employers, but they're also working with the government to make sure that these labor laws are coming into place. So that's what the industrial age labor looked like. And during this time, so it's from the 1850s until the 1970s, really the trend was a massive boom in manufacturing, especially post World War II. Post World War II, there's just this massive boom in manufacturing. And the employment trend, so before they would just bring in laborers. It's just anybody, any able body that they can bring in, they would hire them, right? But then now the trend is to have this stable, long-term employment. It was the norm, sometimes for your whole life. So you hear of people 30, 40, even 50 years with the same company doing the same task, and they just had this lifelong company loyalty. And during this time, during this boom, there was the wages were increasing for middle class. So instead of being just the high class, and I've been watching The Gilded Age on, is it Netflix or Max? I think it's on Netflix. I've been watching The Gilded Age. I can't remember what it's on. It's on Netflix or Max, whatever, streaming. And there's 3 seasons. They're on their 4th season right now, so it's just rolling out. I haven't been watching the 4th season. I'm gonna wait until season premieres or season finales and then watch the whole thing. But it's during this time of the industrial age that you see this class war at the top. So there's upper class war at the top. It's set in New York, and you're seeing how the people from old money and the people from new money are trying to integrate, and it kind of looks at at that. So one of the new money is somebody who's married to a railroad baron. He's been successfully, working on these railroads, getting huge contracts, and so he's got a lot of money available to him. And so with the World War II, so that's in the 1800s. Now, as we're in the mid 1900s, we're looking at this rise in wages for the middle class. And then, as I mentioned, office jobs are beginning to grow. And so now, instead of just having manual labor, you have manual labor and administrative positions that are helping to kind of manage these large functioning companies with, multitudes of people. So, think things like human resources, like a hiring squad, sales teams, marketing teams. Those are starting to integrate into the employment trends at that time. So that was up until the 70s. Now, the digital shift started happening in the 1980s. So, from the 1980s until now, this is a digital shift in what we think of as careers, as jobs, employment, labor. So, the things that are changing is the automation eliminated much of the manual labor. I remember the 1980s too. It was like really popular. If you watch the old movies, a lot of the movies are set around people who are inventors and kind of clunking around trying to figure out how to, make something super new, super innovative that they can make a great deal of money on. That actually is a core theme throughout history, I think, but especially in America. If you ever read The Gilded Age by Mark Twain, it's set in that late 1800s period of time. But you've got these flim flam men that are out there and they're like trying to sell these ideas and get everyone excited, and they're very charismatic with their words, and they do draw people in. However, however, you also have this boom or bust cycle going on. And so even though they're kind of promoting themselves and saying, I've got this or that, a lot of the times you're finding that actually they're actually poor, even though they're saying that they're rich, even though they're acting as if they have money or they're coming from money. They're actually struggling, and it's kind of an interesting thing to see that there's really not a change. It's kind of been this like core thread running through the birth of America, and through it. It really hasn't changed even now. So automation during this time eliminated much of the labor. I had Mike on here and he was giving me some numbers that were like back in those times, it was like 25% during the Great Depression, that there was 25% unemployed, which is a pretty stark number. But a lot of those people had the ability to, like, they already had gardening set up. They had a way of feeding themselves. They had really tight knit communities, or even really tight knit families within those communities, that they could have a way to like figure out how we're going to share food. Whereas, so that was about 98% of the American population was able to, like, they all had their own gardens. They all had their own means of self sustainability. Whereas now that number has shifted. So now about 2% of people have their own gardens, have their own means of feeding themselves, and 98% of the population is dependent on this system of convenience where there's groceries, there's pharmacies, health area, like all of our society right now, how it's operating, from healthcare to government to supply chain systems. All of that is where most of the population is dependent on. Okay, so when you're looking at breaking away from the system, or maybe even destroying the current system, really think, do I want to put myself in jeopardy? Like, how dependent am I on the system that I am starkly against? How against the system am I, and what responsibility am I taking for that? Do I farm that agency of having my own food system, or even connecting with my neighbors in my system? Am I looking at that and being really honest with myself, or am I dependent on a grocery store? Am I dependent on the internet to bring me, items that I need? Am I dependent on the government to give me food subsidies, in the form of like food benefits or cash benefits or whatever. Look at how integrated you are into the system before you start to try and tear it down. Is my That's my advice. But you're seeing this shift. So from the even 100 years ago, most people had their own way of feeding themselves, and we're kind of moving into 100 years ago where it's going to be like the depression, and we'll see what happens in this upcoming future. So anyways, going back to the 1980s until now, the other shift is we're looking at computers. So personal computers, I think it was 1984 when the first Macintosh was available for the home, personal home computer. So from then until the 1990s, it was kind of this novelty to have a personal computer in your home. It was a novel idea. Everyone was kind of like, oh my gosh, but it was also expensive, right? So manufacturing wasn't where it's at now. And so, back then it was like you got this really hunky piece of machinery, but it was a personal computer. And so, oh my gosh, we got a personal computer. So it was really novel. And then they started integrating it into classrooms. So, that was the young age of us playing Oregon Trail. I remember there was a few others, but it wasn't until the 90s when the internet started coming up, and then people are developing these systems or games that you can put on. So you used to have a floppy disk, and then there was a hard disk for memory. And then, eventually over time, by the 2000s, it turned into this little digital thing, and now we have the cloud. So now it's like you don't even need a piece of anything to store information. You can store information directly into the technology pieces that you have. So with the computers and with the internet, it centralized and digitized information and communication. So email became fax, then it became Slack, and then it became these artificial intelligence agents. And it has greatly and dramatically shifted how and where we work. So now, with all of these different ways of communication, as far as the digital communication, it's shifted quite a bit. The shift is from these physical factories. So instead of being in factories, now we're in these information factories. So we're managing information instead of managing widgets, right? So, whatever the thing that you're making, if you're managing that and you're doing it from a physical labor standpoint, that's one thing. But now we have these information factories where it's, most of the people that are working now are like working from a computer. So the information factories are, these big tech companies like Google and Meta and other, big tech outlets that you can think of. And the other thing is that the work moved online. So remote tools became a standard, right? So think Zoom, think Dropbox, or even Google Drive, Trello, which is like this project managing system to use, GitHub. These things are now norms that we use in our day-to-day lives. Most of us have been on a Zoom call. Most of us have used Teams or Slack or these other ways of communicating remotely. And we'll really talk about that because I have this office to remote breakdown. So it wasn't until the 1950s, 1970s that the office administrative people started working. So they're on site in the factories, in their offices, and so that's really where the office administrators had started. So think typewriters. I'm sure you've seen the shows like Mad Men, comes to mind. You know, you have all of these secretaries and they're all like typing away at their typewriters and, you know, taking notes for the boss. And so you have like the boss and then you have the secretary. And, you know, even Mad Men was like these marketing sales guys. And so think of that. That's like the integration of this work location. So the employer model, like I said at that time, was these long-term positions, and some of them were even pension focused. So you're looking at pensions, and then this rise of the middle class because this is post World War II. So really, the shift in the job market altogether had shifted from, you know, before it was just manual labor and, you know, just little things. And now we have these huge companies just blowing up, auto manufacturers and just anything else that you can think of that would be manufacturing. I think of, you know, household items that you would have like KitchenAid or a toaster or refrigerators or whatever the thing is. Like you have these big companies that, you know, are big names to us now. There's still some of them around, like Kenmore and Maytag, and you know, just all of these like inside the home things. And now it's even gone on even further. There's a lot more to everything. I learned about TikTok Shop the other day, like a week ago, which is kind of funny. And they have like all of these companies, like Vivor and you know all of these off-brand companies that are like providing these items to you for really really inexpensive because of the increase in automation in these worlds. So then moving from the 1980s to the 1990s, this is where the hybrid begins. This is really where personal computers, like I said, 1984, the first Macintosh was made available. Huge novelty. Like everyone's like, oh my gosh, the future. And you know, back in the 80s, if you watch the movies in the 80s, there was very much this like drive for this futuristic sci-fi world. Think like Back to the Future or what are the other ones? I'm sure there's other ones. But I think Back to the Future where they're like, oh yeah, hoverboards and like all this other cool stuff. And so that was like this really interesting trend back then. There was a lot of this futuristic desire by that generation to really have this futuristic mindset. So personal computers came out and they're like, oh my gosh, it's so cool. And then you have in the 90s, the email started. So it was, I remember getting my first Gmail account. You like when the Gmail account came out, you had to, and I still have it, but you had to get a request, like a friend request basically, from somebody who already had it. So it was really like this novel, secretive, like, oh my gosh, I need to find somebody who has, and back then Google wasn't what it is now, but I need to find a friend that, you know, has that can give me a link so that I can get my own Google account, my own Gmail account. And it was like kind of this hype. There was a little bit of hype in the IT industry about it. And so the thing that also shifted in this 80s and 90s period is the employer model. So, you know, before the 1980s and 1990s, hi, Rihanna. We for sure thought there would be flying cars by now. Cue the dial-up sound, yes. The AOL sound. But during this 80s and 90s, and thank you for showing up. Good to see you. You have more job hopping. So the job hopping starts. So before it was like this long-term, you know, lifetime loyalty to the companies that you're working for. So if you're working for AT&T, you're with AT&T for like from the time that you get hired on until the time that you're done. Like you're not leaving that job, you're staying in it. But in the 1980s, 1990s, now we have job hopping. And then to go further into that, in the 2000s to the 2010s, now we have these digitally enabled offices. And what does that mean? Like, we're all connected to the internet. We're, whether it's DOS or whatever system the company is working for. I remember I was working with, I think it was Sears back in the day. I think it was Sears. Sears had these really old companies. I was working for a bank. It had this like DOS system that they had from like the beginning of time from computers. It was very ancient, but it worked. Like, it got the things done. It was DOS, and it hadn't had a technology update for quite a bit of time. I remember working for a ski resort, and their systems, it was like very clunky. All of these ERP systems that we use now were not even a thing back then. It was like email, so you would get emails, and then, it was whatever the management system was. If you're in like manufacturing, it's like some sort of enterprise resource planner. If you're in sales, it's some sort of customer resource manager, so CRM. And so you have all of these things developing during this time. So when I say it's a digitally enabled office, that means that most of the employees are now hooking up into computers, their work computers, and they're just working in that, whatever it is. This is when like Microsoft really took a huge leap by creating this office software. So think Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints. This is really an area where most of the time Apple was very innovative. They were like first time launching all the cool gadgets that we use now. So think the computer, the personal home computer, and Macintosh also did the first smartphone. So in 2007, the first smartphone pops in. I know that Fitbit came out, but I know that the Apple Watch, which is now like connected to your smartphone, that Apple Watch is like, everybody really values that. And they did another first. Siri, I think, was another one that they integrated into their system. So Apple did a lot of firsts, but Microsoft did a lot of firsts in a different setting. So now, we're using Microsoft Office, and we get all of our updates, and people are like, they have their they have their burnout moments. I remember, watching South Park, and they're like, Bill Gates, you suck. Because of some sort of, Windows update that was happening. So, during this time, the 2000s to 2010s, now everything is becoming even more digitally enabled. We're rolling out this digital information. We're linking together business to business, so B2B. We're, talking with each other in spreadsheets and other ways. So the tools that are really being introduced at this time is the internet, right? So the internet was around in the 90s, but it wasn't adopted by businesses really until the 2000s. And I remember even in college, as I'm in college, we're having to learn how to use all of Microsoft products. We're operating on Microsoft computers. It really wasn't like, at the time in 2005, it wasn't big to have your own personal laptop. But by 2009, it was like, if you didn't have one, how are you doing your work as a student, right? I purchased the 2009 MacBook, which was awesome. It was such a good machine. They just don't make them like they used to. But the internet is being rolled out, and then the smartphones are being rolled out. And now, back then, that in 2007, the smartphone, that first Apple Gen 1 smartphone, iPhone, is this novelty. We did have cell phones, but now, like, you have a cell phone that can plug into the internet, and now, like, there wasn't any Wi-Fi then, and now, like, Wi-Fi is everywhere. In fact, you expect Wi-Fi to be everywhere. So the employer model, now we're jumping into contract work. Now we're jumping into like online gig work. So people are, and if you are in an area of expertise and you're working right now, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you start taking on contracts, that you start moving yourself into building a business structure for yourself as a 1099 contractor if that lands for you. If you don't do that, the way things are trending, the things that I'm seeing, it's going to be increasingly difficult to get employed. It already is. I see the trend on LinkedIn. Go on LinkedIn. If you don't have a LinkedIn account, you could probably go on there. But every time I go on there, like the first thing I see, I don't know if they're target marketing me, is hiring companies. They're It's a long process. You know it's weeks and weeks of waiting. It's you know I went and applied for a job, and I got 3 interviews and an insight tour. No, 4 interviews. Okay. So I apply to the job. It's a pretty high level job. It's higher on the middle management. I have the experience. I have the knowledge and know-how, the technical expertise. And so first I met with a talent acquisition specialist. And that's, this is granted you can even get to that point. So first I met with a talent acquisition specialist. Then I met with the hiring team. So who would be the manager and then the manager above that, because they're looking at, okay, we need to get the best person in place for that. Then, so those are both online meets. And then I have an in-person meet where I'm going and I'm meeting with different departments. So there's two different interviews there in person, and then also like this tour. And they ended up going with another candidate, which is fine. Like that was bound, like, not that it's bound to happen, but it happens. And so they ended up going with another candidate. And that was like this really long process. I even did a Clifton strengths assessment with them. So it was even more of this like added in there, which was cool. Like I liked doing that strengths assessment. It really made me. Hi, Mike. Good to see you. Doing that strengths assessment really made me realize, like, oh, okay, like no wonder I'm good at this job, because that my strengths are very much needed in that environment. So, as I'm doing this, I'm also looking at taking my expertise, the things that I've worked on for my whole life. So, expertise is so from a scientific perspective, to be a expert in your field, it's roughly like 7 to 10 years of being like directly in that field and working through those things. So the part that makes you an expert is like you've run the full gamut of anything that could happen, and so you have a really strong problem solving memory to apply to new situations. So you have, planning experience. I work in supply chain, so I work in procurement. It's a very, there's a very certain type of personality. Like there's a certain type of personality for accounting. But if you've been in accounting for a long period of time, figure out ways to utilize that and market yourself to, get these short-term contracts or whatever contracting that you can, because it's going to set you apart. It's going to, like, as I'm looking at the trends right now, just from a career standpoint, it's going to be really vitally important that you're staying up with kind of the times if you want to really anchor in and have some solid income streams. So that will help you greatly. So think of companies like Fiverr and Upwork, and I think there's other things that you can go and apply to. What are the other things? So the other gig work is like Uber. Um, what are the other guys? Instacart. Um, Gosh, there's more. I know that there's more. Yeah, trade jobs too. So if you're wanting to set yourself apart, think about trade jobs. So if you have been working, let's say that you're an electrician and you've been working for a company, consider getting yourself licensed and all the things that go into that, so that you can do side projects to really keep you engaged, as long as it's not like you don't have a non-compete um, contract with your current company. But just think of really positioning yourself ahead of the trend, ahead of where things are going. And then, finally, I don't want to diminish it enough, but oh, thank you. But also look at your food, the way that what resources you need. If you need food, like, do you have a little space in your area to garden stuff? And can you keep that, like freeze it or can it? Think of ways to kind of pull back some of your agency from the convenience of grocery stores, from the convenience of, whatever the situation is. Like maybe you have enough space to get chickens, and so now you have these chickens that you can take care of. Really start now while it's relatively safe to do those things, instead of doing it out of necessity, instead of doing it out of fear that you're not going to eat, instead of fear. The scarcity mindset is real. So, yeah. And then, so let's talk. So that's contract gig work. That's 2000s to 2010s. And now we're going to move on to 2020 until now. So this is a post-COVID experience in this era. The pandemic was a huge integration of digital information. We'll go over some of the numbers. But the dominant work location post COVID, or during COVID, post COVID, is remote by necessity. Okay. So now the tools, instead of being just internet and smartphones, now Zoom. I have Zoom on my smartphone, I have it on my iPad. We have now AI, and AI is being really heavily integrated into most of the business. There's a lot of business AI assistants. I notice them when I go and, if I go in and log on, people, I even have a sales company that I purchased their app and to, manage all of my websites, manage all my funnels and webinars and all that stuff. And they're promoting AI in their business. So there's a lot of AI out there. And then now we also have these collaboration suites. What does that mean? That's like Microsoft Teams, Slack, WhatsApp, like all these applications are popping up, and they're available to everybody. And it's a way to collaborate remotely. Now we're collaborating remotely. So the employer model is this rise in freelancing, which is why I really, really strongly, if you have an expertise, anything that you're an expert in, start marketing yourself as a freelancer. If you don't know how to do it, find a mentor that will help walk you through that. And be careful of, I know that I'm like in this realm of coaching, and I don't know, I kind of feel a little indifferent to some of the mechanisms that people like. They'll come into my DMs and they'll say, hey, I work with coaches and, blah, 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 we can do this or that. So just be wary of some of the pitches that you get. Do a lot of research and figure out, like, do a lot of research, find people that are satisfied with the product, talk to them. Don't just believe the hype, the sales hype. Like, they've they've really the sales automation and techniques are almost really too good. And so find real people, find a way to connect with that message. Don't believe the hype. Um, and really be honest about what kind of energy you have. So if you're struggling and you're thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm going to buy this system that says I can make $100,000 a month if I do all of these things. I get these ads all the time. I'm sure you guys do too, where it's like, my teenager used AI and they're making $1 million a month by using AI things by doing these techniques. Just be really very wary about be wary about that. And then there's also this employer model of AI replacing a lot of the things. So a lot of the times you'll be able to, I remember when the digital assistants started coming out, and it was really frustrating. Like, think about on the phone, even when they started automating and like, press one for the office, press two for this sales team, press three for accounting, press four for accounts payable or receivables. And you're trying to navigate that, and sometimes it's really, really annoying. It's just like prompt after prompt after prompt. So now what's happening is AI is now that digital prompt that if you go onto a website, let's say you go onto walmart.com and you're like, you'll see the prompt come up, hey, can we help you with anything? Or, hi, I'm Lisa, the AI assistant for walmart.com. Can I help you find something? So now you have that like AI assistant, and we're so used to that now. It's being like rolled out, and we're just kind of normalizing and accepting that. And a lot of the times, if you get, that was just one example, but you can get other examples where you're like, okay, I'm not getting the information. Just give me a human that I can have, a conversation with so that I can figure out what I need. So, yeah, the post COVID situation is a huge thing. I just want to speak to a human. Yeah. Which is why, like, it's important, like, if you're going to be creating a business, I was even thinking this today, because there's a lot of things that I can do to automate what I do. Um, a lot of the times you can put like keywords, and when they put that keyword in there, then they get a link. And I'm thinking, do I really want to automate that? Or do I want to like have a conversation and really engage with that person? So am I going to set myself aside as a niche business that's not implementing all of these AI tools and assistants and, whatever into my business? It's going to take a little bit more time, but it's going to be like a little bit more natural of a conversation. And I want to connect with people. So let's look at the employment numbers snapshot of this over time. So we have the industrial age, which peaked in the 1970s with 19 million Americans employed. So 19 plus million Americans were employed in manufacturing at that peak in the 1970s. Like I said, we went through this huge World War II, post World War II boom in manufacturing, and now just like products are being made on a mass scale. And then today, there's only about 12 million people that are employed in manufacturing. Okay. So employment was dense in union heavy sectors. So the auto sector, the steel sector, the coal sector, there's a lot of union heavy employment in these sectors. So yeah, now let's look at the digital age. So in the digital age, the tech sector jobs have exploded, right? So think software engineers, data scientists, product managers, application designers, the tech world has exploded in that. And it was really from like the 2000s. I remember, well, I guess MIT was around, but you have these information technology degrees that kind of popped up, and that's where it kind of, rolled out from there. Like people are going in and they're learning how to manage the tech world because, the trend is they're seeing that they're going to need people in these, and we still do. Like, even though all these companies are adopting AI, they still need a human there to make sure that the codes are right, to make sure that the information is correct. I was on LinkedIn and I was reading this story from this lady, and she's a book writer. She doesn't use any AI to help her, but she has been writing all of these stories in newsletter form on Substack. And so she screenshot her conversation she had with ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT is like, she's like, hey, can you look at my stories that I've created and let me know if a book writer, like somebody that, if I want to get published, if I sent these to a book writer, what do you see in it? So the ChatGPT convinces her to, post the link, and I'll read the story and I'll give you some feedback. So she posts book number one, book idea number one, and the ChatGPT is like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, like gives this really, I don't want to say basic, but gives like a feedback on her topic in her book. And then it's like, oh, would you like to do another one? If you have another one, post the link and I'll read it. And so she did that. And then, same thing, blah, blah, blah. And then she posted another one and same thing. And then she posted a fourth one, and she's like, you didn't even mention these things that are in the story. And so she caught ChatGPT in, it hadn't read the book. So she's like, you didn't even read the story, because if you read the story, you would have noted these really key things. And then, digging deeper into some of the other ones, she's like, what was that about? And the topic that it thought it was about was not what the story was about. It was like thinking it was sex trauma, and it was actually like opiate addiction that she was talking about in the one story. And then she's like, you're lying. Like, how can you lie? And so it's like, I'm really sorry. No, I've like betrayed your trust. And I understand if you don't want to keep communicating with me because of that. If you want to keep doing so, just copy and paste the full story into the text here and I'll help you kind of dwindle it down to what it is. But, in changing over to ChatGPT, like, just really remember to keep your humanity in your sovereignty in whatever sector that you're in. And, in this career job digital age, really remember to just be in the world and not of it. Be in the world and not of it. If you're going to go into the digital labyrinth, do so knowing that you're going in to map it out and not become it. And not, there's a lot of like stories where people will, like, if you look into the darkness for too long, it almost like starts to absorb into you, if that makes any sense. So attention is everything. And as we're in this digital framework, as we're navigating it and trying to figure out how do I keep my humanity while still, existing in the current world that I'm in, do so without despair. If you have despair over it, really look at, why do I have despair over that? Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. The next piece is of the digital age is remote jobs have tripled post pandemic. So working from home rose from 5% pre 2020 to 30% in 2022. It was a huge, huge uptick. My job, I couldn't work remote. I had to go into the office. The way the server was set up, it was like impossible to work from home. But then I went into another job and I could work from home. Like the server wasn't that big of a deal. Everything was already set up online. So, I was a hybrid position. And I like the hybrid positions because it gives me a little bit more work freedom. I'm not against like remote working or hybrid working for the administrative role that I do. In fact, I actually enjoy it. But it this shift is a huge turn of events and it happened so quickly. So yeah. Now, when I was talking about freelancing and I was talking about being able to market your expertise, whatever the expertise is, being able to market your expertise online is going to be huge. So freelancers now make up 39% of the US workforce. Let me repeat that. 39% of the US workforce right now is made up of freelancers. So people using their expertise and developing 1099 contracts for a set period of time for a set amount of money, and they go in, they do the thing, and then they're done. 39% of the workforce. It's a huge increase. So, I did talk about it, but platforms like Upwork, Fiverr, and LinkedIn, these have become the digital labor marketplaces. If you're going to hire, these are the places that you're going to go to. So Upwork, Fiverr, and LinkedIn. Okay. Now, shift in work identity. The industrial era worker is a blue collar worker or a unionized worker, where now this digital era worker is really a digital nomad or a hybrid worker. They're able to go into the office and then not be in the office. And from the 1970s to today, it's been a 5 million people labor decrease in like the manufacturing sector. The industrial era worker is working fixed hours with stable pay, whereas the digital era worker is output based. So whatever they're, able to maintain in a contract, they've got these flexible contracts, meaning, you can have somebody for 4 to 6 months, or maybe even, just hiring somebody for a day to come in and do some data work for your business. Think like virtual assistants. That's actual people that are working virtually on your business. If there is this huge increase in freelance labor, part of that is like the virtual assistants. If you have a startup company and you're like, I need to hire somebody to come in and do my sales for me, and then maybe somebody to come and do the social media for me so that I can kind of farm that work out. Even though like I am a freelancer and I'm getting, whatever contracts I'm getting. Like I've even thought of that. I'm like, once I get to a certain position in my business, I'm going to hire a virtual assistant, somebody that's going to be able to come in and do, some of the things that are time consuming that they're really specialized in. I want to get these people that are specialized in it and still maintain my brand identity. So in the industrial era versus the digital era, we have this loyalty to the employer. Remember, in the early onset, people would stay at a company for their whole lives. And now, I think even the boomers still kind of say it of like, you should get a job and then buy a house. And, the environment was very much different. The work environment was very much different. And there's a little bit of blindness into these really big shifts in this digital era of what that work looks like. So now you have a loyalty to the mission, and if your loyalty to the mission is starts to deteriorate, you're going to leave that company. There's a lot of job hopping that happens. You're going to find another company that's going to closer represent your values, and you're going to be really honing in on what is their mission and does that really resonate with me. And then the other thing is there's this loyalty to flexibility. Okay. So there's a lot of flexibility that happens when you're a freelancer. And so you get to go in and, fulfill a contract, and then you've got your flexibility. I think about writers were kind of the early hybrid workers, the early remote workers where they're just sitting. I'm thinking like Carrie from Sex and the City. She's just sitting there in her, her New York apartment, smoking her cigarettes and typing on this Macintosh laptop, her little articles for, not little articles, but her articles for the newspaper. She's, I don't know, I think it's I don't know if she's page 6. Wherever she's at, she's got her post, she's got her niche of what she talks about. She's using her life to, to really be flexible, but she's also has her own mission. It's like, they hired her for that specific purpose, and so now she's able to fulfill that mission of, speaking about whatever topics are of interest to her and the readers of that particular magazine or that newspaper. And that has shifted too, the way that we get information. Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about is the industrial worker versus digital era worker. You have your identity is your role in that company. So if you are a foreman in that company, you're a foreman in that company, and that's part of your identity. And that role really defines you. Whereas in the digital age, now we're looking at the skills in branding as part of your identity. So what are your skills? What is your brand? How is it relating to your clients or your customers? And it's a little bit more flexible, like I said. So, in this industrial area, you're looking at having your physical self be a means for trading labor for wages. But now we have this mental or digital presence that we're trading for some form of currency. The workplace, instead of being in an on-site area, is now like shifting into this cloud, essentially, like the internet. And the other thing is you're logging into systems instead of, clocking in. You're just logging in and then doing the work and then logging out. And I've done a myriad of different types of jobs. So I've done labor work, and I've also done a lot of administrative online digital work. So there is a huge shift there. So one of the other things, it's been a little over an hour. Okay. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is some of the challenges right now in employment. So some of the challenges are, I kind of talked about it when I was talking about digital dating, where like even chat rooms, it like opened up this whole world of people that you can talk to in chat rooms. Digital dating opened up this whole new pool of people that you could potentially date. And the shift from on-site or even hybrid, locally hybrid, like where you have to go into the office a couple days a week and then work remote hybrid a couple days a week, even that has like opened up the whole world to job applicants. So if the position is remote and the people are applying to that position, I remember I was applying to a position. I really wanted this position at Pinterest because they're very much like promoting this remote work environment where for 3 months out of the year, they are okay with you going and staying somewhere international for 3 months out of the year, and then the rest of the year you had to be in your home area. But you're able to like trans basically translocate yourself into another area. So if you wanted to go stay in the south of France for 3 months, you can go work in the south of France for 3 months, and just every day you kind of just normalize yourself to that timeline. But you go in and you do your work, and then the rest of the time you have to be somewhere in the continental United States, or at least in the United States, wherever they hired you from. So there was a little bit of, it opened the world with this idea of online complete, hi Luca, welcome back, online remote work. And the thing that, like with the opening of chat rooms and the opening of like the digital dating pool, like where you're able to, my girlfriend broke up with me. Oh my gosh. I feel ya. I'm dating somebody, I don't know. Well, anyways, I'm not going to get into my personal stuff, but so right now we're learning that even though the job pool has opened up, that the rules of engagement are changing. So even with the freelance and digital contracting work, the rules of engagement are changing. It's not about going into a workplace and hiring on the spot. It's engaging with these companies that are, showcasing, like I go on to LinkedIn and I'm looking, and it's like there's tons of remote positions, but getting an interview with those positions are, we're going to talk about that. Okay, so we have a skills misalignment. So we're hiring, so you'll get a response, we're hiring, but you're not what we need, right? So the job market has outpaced education. Employers now want this tech fluency, they want adaptability, and they want a bit of emotional intelligence. And they're looking at these niche proficiencies. So if you're good at AI or data, but many of these applicants were trained in outdated models. So you have to be like with the times. Like people really want this plug and play person to bring in to fulfill the roles that they're hiring for. So fields like coding or AI operations or digital marketing are booming right now. AI in particular, I'm just watching it like, oh my gosh, this is booming, but I have a hesitancy about like how it's booming, right? So traditional workers are kind of feeling a little bit left behind. Like, what about a manufacturing? And even in the manufacturing field, there is a little bit of like robotics being introduced into it. I remember working at a company. When was that? Probably about 2015, 2016. They purchased a robot, and it was, I worked in steel manufacturing, making these huge machines, and they got basically it was a robot, had a little robot arm, but it was able to like manufacture these really intricate metal pieces with precision. So you still needed a human at the helm making sure that the program was correct and making sure that to program it right. But now that robotic arm is able to do all of that stuff. We need manufacturing to come back so we're not so reliant on other countries. Or, things like 3D printing is like, if you research and develop that, like then you can make a lot of these things in your own home. I know that a lot of people are are kind of working on that. But even still, I agree. Like we should have a little less foreign dependence on goods and a lot more. I'm all about taking back agency to ourselves. So our country is an amalgamation of all the people that are in it. So having manufacturing at home, like even if we have to get really creative with it, is going to be important. So the skills misalignment is kind of a key piece. The second thing is we have got this algorithmic gatekeeping. So the algorithms really started to pulse heavily in the mid 2010s, so 2015 era, and now it's just like everywhere. This whole algorithm is everywhere, and now it's penetrating into all of the hiring markets. So the resume, if you have your resume and you're sending it to a company, you have your cover letter and you're sending to a company, if it doesn't make it past that AI bot, you're not even going to be considered. So that's really a thing that's happening. So companies are using applicant tracking systems, and those screen your resumes by keywords. So it's looking at keywords of what's the job posting and then what is the cover letter say? What does the resume say? Are we interested in that? And so it has to make it past the applicant tracking bot system in order to even be come in front of a human. And one of the things, the trends that I see on LinkedIn is, we've got several hundred applicants for this position and you didn't make it past it. So when you have several hundred, like let's say you have 800 applicants that applied to your remote position doing a sales, an executive position, right? They're going to want to like field that down, and going through 800 applicants, because now you've introduced yourself to the whole global market, right? So now you have these 800 applicants, and now how are you going to reasonably spend your time really well? You're going to use AI now that that is a thing. So it's looking at keywords to your resume or your cover letters. So if you don't tailor your resume or your cover letter to each job, demonstrating that you have the skills, experience, or whatever, something that is going to pop out and say, this person, is qualified to make it to the first interview steps. It's automatically rejected. I was on LinkedIn and somebody was like, I sent my resume in, I did all the work, I sent my resume in, and then immediately what happened was 4 minutes later, I got a rejection that they didn't accept my resume. 4 minutes from sending it to whatever. So things get auto rejected in that. So you have this interface that you have to go to before you even can get to the human eyes and have that connection with the human beyond that resume, right? So it's become this game of how can I satisfy the algorithm and get past the algorithm and then get to, another human and show them my soul and substance and, what I have to offer. So that's algorithmic gatekeeping. The next thing is personal branding pressure, right? So if you're not a brand, are you even employable? There, I talked about the social media influencer, the brand influencers that are popping up. But platforms like LinkedIn are also creating this performance layer over job seeking. So people now need portfolios and video intros and personal websites that, showcase this is who I am, and kind of the social proof of here's here's who I am if you want to consider me. So there's like this pressure for personal branding of if you don't have a LinkedIn profile that's like exposing all of the things that you are skilled or talented in, then that is also not going to be considered. That's a little much in my opinion. It is, but it's like what's happening. This is what's happening. So this may exclude some neurodivergent, introverted, or lower resourced individuals who they can do the job, but they just don't have this brand, personal brand flair, right? They have to market themselves. And so we're coming into this digital age with the idea that you have to market yourself even if you don't necessarily want to. It's gone past that. So freelancing, you're having to market yourself. Now even in your social medias, you're wanting to brand yourself. So you're wanting to, appear a certain way. So, you know, think of what your profile picture is. Think about what your background's going to be and what kind of information you're going to put on, what your skills are, demonstrate some of the things that you can do well. And, LinkedIn is a place to do that. Instagram sometimes is a place that you can do that. You have all of these different media pieces that kind of form this online identity or this digital identity. And I think if it's not tomorrow, it's the next day that I'm going to be talking about digital identity. It's on my schedule. I scheduled stuff. I'm trying to be really intentional this week on scheduling things. So it's kind of crazy that, you're going to be possibly creating this personal website to really show off like who you are. It's almost like this cover letter. You can put video intros in there. Hey, my name is Amelie and I, have 20 years experience in supply chain with over 10 years experience in procurement. And, here's some of the things that I've done. So you can create a website just to show yourself off. Just to be considered. You got to have that social proof. So next one is AI and automation replacing robots or replacing roles. So now you're just not competing with humans. You're also competing with the tech automation that comes into it. And I don't necessarily think that tech automation is bad per se, but it does shift the labor market into a different direction. So instead of having manual labor, you're having manual labor who are programming the machines and they're just watching to make sure that everything is going well. If there's some sort of code that is, sounding an alarm, that they're there to do that. But now entry level positions, okay, especially admin, data entry, copywriting, customer service positions are being traded over to these bots. So the AI bots are, and the automation there is replacing, these entry level positions where, typically you would have to call into a company, talk to the receptionist, they patch you through. But now that role is being taken over by automation. So instead of having that receptionist there, now it's like, oh, okay, now you have to go through all these guided prompts on the phone, or even when you're on the website, the company's website, it's immediately the first thing is we're going to give you a bot and we're going to try and figure out what prompts you to even talk to another human instead of just talking to a human. And with all of this, it's expanding. So it's not just, the administrative position. We're talking about data entry, we're talking about copywriting, customer service, and even like these startup businesses, all of these entrepreneurs are installing these AI assistant bots and trying to create these huge companies quickly with the use of this automation process. So before, jobs used to be stepping stones. You'd get your entry level position. I know when I started procurement, I was in a purchasing assistant position. It was part time. I was just checking purchase orders and updating the information, when things were going to arrive, communicating with the vendor, and having that dialogue. But, even now that could be automated to where, okay, well, let's see. Can we look and see if this is here, and is the data entry correct, and can I pull that? So these entry level positions used to be stepping stones. So now, the entry level position, they're like, even though it's an entry level position, we want 3 to 5 years of work experience before you can even start this entry level position job, or an educational combination that will satisfy the role. And if they're asking for, like an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, or, a combination of work experience plus some sort of degree, they're looking at all of that. But even now, that's being overlooked. So once once the stepping stone of an entry level job would get people into the door, now we're looking at the doors being just kind of automatically shut. Like you're not able to even be considered. So AI doesn't demand benefits. It doesn't demand vacation or 6 days, sick days yet. And the companies that are running this AI through their company know that. They know that AI is always going to be there. And then, okay, so we've got 10 ones. All right, let's move on to the next one. So we've got experience inflation, and I just talked, I'm going to hit the lotto and go off grid. Take me with you. Um, that's like King's North, though. You can't, it's really, really hard to go off grid. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of work. So experience inflation, I was kind of talking a little bit about this, but you need experience to get a job, but you need to get a job to get that experience. And so if these entry level positions are roles that are demanding 3 to 5 years experience, for what used to be entry level, it's like, this experience inflation is taking over. Now companies are offloading training responsibilities to candidates, expecting them to arrive for plug and play. Okay? They're so instead of, them coming in and getting trained, they're expecting them to be pre-optimized, meaning that they can just come in and do the entry level role, whatever it is. Next is 6. We've got wage suppression and gigification. So why hire somebody full time when we can hire you as a contractor? Okay. So corporations, as I mentioned, it's freelancers are 39% of the employed people right now are freelancers. This is where it's going. And I've been saying this for a few months now when I realized that that's what's happening. But corporations, they're turning now to freelance gig workers to save money and reduce their own liabilities. So a freelance worker can come in, and it might be a lot less expensive for them to pay. Let's say that a role is $50 an hour. They come and they hire them for $70 an hour, $80 an hour. So within the company, it's 50. The contractor they're paying is, let's say it's 80. Okay, so they're paying $30 extra an hour for this person, but they don't have the sales, the employment tax, the income tax that they have to match. So let's say you hire somebody at 50, but you're actually paying them $100 an hour, with all the benefits and the taxes and all the liabilities that come with that. Now you can hire the 1099 worker to come in, pay them 80, and contractor worker is responsible for their own income taxes. So whatever their income is over the year, they have to report that to the IRS, and so they're responsible for it. But the company that's hiring, that corporation that's hiring, does not have to pay that extra amount. There's, yeah, it is cheaper for them to do it that way. It reduces their liability, it saves them money, and that's a big reason why I say that, as we're kind of moving into this futuristic digital society, that this is increasingly becoming the norm. People are increasingly looking for those 1099 contractors to fulfill the roles that they're looking to fulfill. So, what does this mean for somebody that is a prospective, employee, or even a prospective contractor? It means that there's a little less job security in that, because you're operating under a contract. You're not going to experience the same benefits as, being a part of that big company. And then there's a little bit more precariousness that comes into it. If, are they going to be satisfied with the terms of the contract? And obviously, like, if you're ever doing any gig work, make sure you have a physical contract. Not a lawyer, not an advisor. I'm just sharing some information and insights that I'm seeing. So you're having less job security, fewer benefits, and a little bit more precariousness into, whether or not that gig is going to work out for long term. Can you keep up all the gigs that you need throughout the year in order to sustain your lifestyle? And, the lifestyles are very extravagant. It's very much different than 100 years ago or even 150 years ago, where the lifestyle that we have now in America is, we live like we live like kings and queens, you guys. Okay? We have everything available to us. It's insane. I can go on to Amazon right now, put add something to cart and get it in 2 days. I can go on to Amazon right now, add to cart, and get my groceries delivered from Whole Foods. I can go on to Safeway, Albertsons, Fred Meyer. Like, pandemic changed everything. I can have everything delivered. I don't even have to leave my house if I don't want to. Like, that was unheard of 150 years ago. Like, that was really just these noble people that were able to do that. Noble and whatever. So we're operating in a different world. Okay. Next, we have identity-based discrimination. So it's still happening in this algorithmic era. We've got discrimination happening. So bias against names, ethnic backgrounds, age, gender, expression, neurodivergence, and disability. Those things still exist. Even ageism is something that I see pop up quite a bit. And it's amplified by algorithms. So they're trained on biased data. They're looking at all of the data of the people. So if you're of a certain age, that it's going to, that's a piece of data that it's taken into consideration. So you've got this whole algorithm that is not just looking at, what does your website say, what does your resume say, what is your cover letter, any other information that you included, but now it's also looking at your ethnic background, your age, your gender, whatever that expression is, and then, disabilities, if there's any neurodivergence. They're just looking at all of this data and compiling it and determining, do we want to hire that identity, yes or no? So ageism especially affects midlife career changers or laid off workers, which is a fascinating consideration. So there's a term called career derailment, and career derailment is that, some it's typically executives are working in a certain environment, and then they could be bullied, they could be overworked, they could be burnt out, but they kind of get to this they kind of get to this wall of, I can't do my job anymore. I feel targeted. I feel this or that. And then they end up leaving that environment. There's a study on it that I was reading about. So the people that are undergoing these career derailments are having, they're having in the algorithm this identity based discrimination of, once you get to be 45 or 50, 55, older years old, even though you have a lot of expertise in a field, because you're moving maybe into another field that you're trying to like change the direction of your life. So what was his job? I was at a graduation and this guy was giving a speech and he was like, so this year with like all of the agency review of financials, the universities got hit really hard. So if they had like a research person there, they were the research, like the funding for research was being like basically paused and pulled. And this guy had been there for like, I want to say 7, but maybe 10 years. I can't remember the number. He'd been there for quite some time. And he was like the research grant person that was monitoring it and managing that and helping like these scientific studies gain funding. But with the, the review of the finances, a lot of that got put on hold. And so it caused this huge disruption in the university system. And so he's like, I'm leaving now. I'm retiring and I'm going to go do the things that I wanted to do. So he straight up like left his career to go pursue, I don't even know what it was, something out in the mountains. Like he just was like, yep, I'm done. I'm going to go do this other thing now. And he's talking about it and I'm just like, and he's saying, oh, it's going to be really hard for you guys. I've never experienced anything like this in my whole career. And I'm just like, part of me is like, you yellow bellied coward. Like, you're not going to remain and like give your expertise in your field that you've been, working in and figure out how to navigate this problem. Like, you're just throwing in the towel, basically, is what I saw. But that happens with people. They get to this certain point of burnout, especially now that we're all like digitally enabled, plugged in, and, really unplugged from ourselves. We need to have like Amelie unplugged and Mike unplugged and all these like I remember MTV had MTV Unplugged, and it was like, instead of being, showing all these music videos, it would just be the singer, their band, and they would be up there playing the actual instruments, singing their songs, like without any digital assistance. It was just like this unplugged. It's kind of a cool novel idea. Okay, so the other thing that is a challenge to getting employment in the first, you like that, mic unplugged, in the new digital employment environment is like remote work is now bottlenecked. So there's thousands of applicants for positions, and then there's only the one remote job. So it's overwhelming. So this rise of remote work comes from the global competition that everyone is experiencing, especially if it's like, yeah, remote job, buyer, and then it's like, you go and research the company. Oh, that company sounds cool. I'm going to apply to that. If you don't make it past the algorithm, like you're competing with over 100 sometimes of people. It's like people will, on LinkedIn, you can click to apply. You can see how many people, roughly how many people have applied for that position. So I look for the ones that a lot of people have not applied to. And then, so with remote work, what used to be local talent pool, so people in the local area, is now thousands of applicants across the country, time zones, pay scales. they're all available for that job. In fact, the job that I applied for, if remote work and LinkedIn wasn't so globally minded, um, I think that they hired somebody outside of my local area and they're moving into the area. And I know that because when I was applying, they're like, oh, we figured you would be talking about what Eugene has to offer, and asking a little bit more about that. So they're looking at this extended talent pool that usually, like if it was 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, and that role was available, I probably would have gotten the job because there's not a huge talent pool in my area that would satisfy that, given I had the same experience. But now it's like they're expanding out, and so now I have to compete not with just people in my area, but people that maybe from Portland or Seattle or wherever, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll move to Eugene, that sounds cool. So, next thing is the systematic fatigue and learned futility. So, you'll see this a lot on LinkedIn. There's a lot of systematic fatigue where, you get this happens on the dating apps. You get hundreds of rejections. Hundreds of rejections. So people will give up, or they'll burn out. They're trying to like go online and apply, and it takes a little bit of time to apply to certain positions. I'd say it's about 30 minutes per application to like make sure everything is keyworded, making sure that your cover letter, and this is using AI assistants to like help you to formulate. I want you to look at this job, look at my cover letter, look at my resume, and like look and see what is the best way to like get beyond these algorithm screening process, basically. So people will have hundreds of rejections. So if you go in and you're applying to hundreds of roles or hundreds of positions, eventually people will give up and they'll burn out. So job hunting has become a full-time job with very little return. If you're out there, there's people that have been out there for 1 year, 2 year, that still haven't gotten a job offer, and maybe they've made interviews, but they didn't get hired for it. So it's a constant need to optimize and perform and network. And when you end up getting ghosted, this is the same for digital dating. Enduring all that ghosting really drains people, even if you are very resilient. It can be very draining. And I talked about digital burnout in a couple of series ago, so go back there if that is of interest to you. But yeah, just really watch for your burnouts, okay? And then the last thing is there's this mismatch between purpose and work, right? People, they do want meaning. Like we want meaning. We want novelty. We want creativity. We want things that make us go aha, things that inspire us. We want we want jobs that provide meaning and make meaning in our lives. And the the jobs that we find are just like kind of compliance based. It's complying to these systems instead of finding a job that has a mission that you're excited about. You end up just getting a job that's maybe sterile and not exciting, but it's just going to pay the bills. So you end up becoming this like, I got to thinking about it because we were talking about Amazon yesterday. We were talking about Amazon yesterday, and Amazon is this like quiet giant that's like building these big fantastic AI, you know, managed manufacture or warehouse systems, and they've got all of these warehouses all across America, and so they're able to distribute and really own up to that time that they need for things. But with that, they have all this automation, but they treat their employees like robots. And I have three people that I can think of off the top of my head that I've met or has like mentioned to me never get a job with Amazon, like it's a soul sucking company. And so it really got me to thinking, like after I'm listening to this podcast, that when you start to treat people like robots, like numbers, like I'm just a number, I just go and plug in every day and I do the thing. Think like Mr. Incredible. Mr. Incredible, I think it was an insurance agent, I'm not entirely certain. But so Mr. Incredible is like showing up to the job and he's just like trying to like help the people that he's working with, trying to help them. And he's coming to a place where they where his boss comes up and he's like, you need to stop paying out and start rejecting more so that we can keep our money. And you could see this soul draining, even though it's animated, you can see the soul drain. There was so much truth in that. That was the Incredibles, not Mr. Incredible, but Mr. Incredible is the guy we're talking about. But I think it's the Incredibles. So if you ever watch that movie and you're watching Mr. Incredible at his position, you can see how soul draining that job was. It didn't have meaning for him. There wasn't purpose. And he was trying to like put some purpose into it, but he couldn't pull that purpose out. Like he was getting demeaned from it. And his boss is like, don't do that. And so he wanted meaning, but he was having to comply instead. So there's the trade-off, meaning to compliance. So post 2020, people are craving soul aligned work. People are craving it. It's not just a survival mechanism. We're not wanting to just comply to something. We want something that is going to give us, like, feed our souls. We want the novelty. We want the excitement. We want to know the things that we're doing have meaning, have connection to us, and that we're not sitting in survival all the time. However, employers often prioritize control and productivity. They don't really look at purpose. They look at control and productivity, okay? So when I made the decision to really pursue emotional intelligence and really build emotional intelligence in my business, it's because it's soul aligned. It's because it's God aligned. It's because I can see into the future that people need emotional intelligence. They need social intelligence. People desire connection. They want meaning. They want purpose. They want identity, not one that they're having to like fake online through their websites or their socials. They want real, true, gritty, like internally aligned work for themselves. So even though the employers are looking at, productivity and control, the people, just like the unions, they're demanding that they be treated like people, that they be treated, that they have this meaning and purpose in their lives, which is why emotional intelligence and social intelligence work. So when you become resilient in emotions, in your social life, when you start to anchor in these frequencies into your system, then you start to align to the things that are right for you instead of, and oddly enough, when you develop your emotional and social intelligence within yourself, you actually outperform people in less time. Like your frequency is so high that you can go in and you're almost like this superman or superwoman. Like you are super being able to go in, and it actually, there's tons of studies out there. It improves productivity. It improves purpose. It improves person's identity. It makes them more resilient. It makes them a better coworker to work with. Imagine working with somebody that they have really strong conflict management skills and they're able to go into a conflict and make a resolution really quick because they're resilient with enough with themselves that they can see the big picture. They're not sitting there in survival mode of and defensive and whatever. They're able to go in, figure out what's going on, get to the base of the problem, and not do it in a way that's like Mickey Mouse cookie cutter. They're able to go into that role, into that conflict, and figure out a resolution with precision and empathy and engagement and really looking at people as humans. So when I say the counterbalance to AI is EI, because AI is like, if you think about the Amazon employee that's like hates their job, slowly is hating their life, maybe even think of ending their life because they're like, this is meaningless, this is purposeless. They're just using me, they're soul sucking me. I have no soul now. Like that's the message that I got from the people that had been working for Amazon. Sorry to call you out, Amazon, but you need it. But yeah, so when they're reporting like I lost my soul, it's telling me that Amazon is more AI than it is EI. Instead of having emotional intelligence and really looking at their top performers as people, I mean, they were making a lot of money, and it really isn't money when it comes down to it. They were they were really looking at not having emotional intelligence, social intelligence. They were going into these basically employment grinders. What's a good way to say that? They're like sheep led to the slaughter into this like emotionless, logistical, analytical, performance based, output based company, but it wasn't soul aligned. Like they weren't aligned to their soul. It was like they were plugging in because it's so AI based. There's a lot of automation that goes into it. So you don't have the connection. You're not treated like a person where like people are truly desiring that in the business. So if that's you, please reach out to me and I will get you situated. If you're looking to improve your emotional intelligence, it helps not just companies, it helps you to be really satisfied with where you are in your life. Don't go into a grinder. You don't need to. Even if you go into a grinder, you can go into it like I'm going into the digital labyrinth and really looking at, okay, what's going on here? What's this? What's the mechanisms? What's the strategy? How can I arrange this? What's the inputs that I'm receiving? How can I use my human brain to really navigate this digital labyrinth and bring people to back to their own soul satisfying self, right? So the mismatch between purpose and work, or that meaning versus compliance, is that you have this standoff between aspirational seekers, so people that they're aspirating to what is soul aligned for me, how can I have meaning in life, and then you're having these like corporate frameworks, this corporate digitized AI system that you have to kind of break through. Hi, roadside walker. All right. Well, that was a lot. It's almost 2 hours. That was a lot. I think. Um, I think we went over quite a bit. Where? What do you mean where? Um, well, we went over quite a bit today, and so I'm going to sign off. I hope that this was really valuable to you guys. It really helped me to kind of see the bigger picture of what's going on. Yeah, we are wet. It helped me to see the bigger picture of what's going on in the career world and what we really need to kind of be engaging with people and some of the help that people need in like building some sort of freelance biz- business. You're a great teacher. Thanks, Mike. So I really hope that helps to kind of frame what is going on and how to navigate it. With the emotional intelligence piece, I want to invite you that if you're watching this and you're saying, how do I know if I am emotionally and socially intelligent? How do I know that I'm going in a soul aligned way that is giving me meaning and personal satisfaction and purpose in my life? Right now, I have a special called Soul Maps, and it is $125. It's a full comprehensive report of your unique blueprint. And then I do a little bit of an energy session with you. So it's about 30 to 40 minutes of an energy session, and there is some add ons if you want to have a longer soon. Awesome. Um, if you want to have a longer session with me. And so I look at your profile, look at your strengths. I look at where there's areas of improvement for you to be, really focusing on and seeing if you can raise that frequency in those areas. It is so potent. It's doing a full, like I said, a soul map. It's just this full blueprint for you. And like I said, right now I have a special. These are normally 197. Right now they're 125 for the month of July. Good to see you, Zindaji. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. I'm booking for the month of July. So if you pay in July and you still want to do like if you want to like do your visit in August, that's totally fine. But for the month of July, this Soulestic Soul Maps I'm promoting that as one of my big products. So I hope that you find that interesting. It's going to help you to really center into your identity and your purpose. Like your blueprint. When I look at it, I see like what the blueprint is for you. So I really hone in on that. And then in our conversations that we have in connecting and having that energy session, it's you're going to be asking questions and I am going to be delivering with precision like some of the things that I see in your blueprint. So I'm looking at it as this beautiful kaleidoscope of you, and then you get the full PDF with all of the information of what I see. And then we have our beautiful little energy session moment that I am working on you as we're doing our appointments. And like I said, right now it's on special. It's normally 197, and right now it is 125. So please reach out to me, and I will send you a link. And yeah, good to see you guys. I hope that this was valuable. If you're looking to grow, that is a great way to help get you started on the path of how am I going to plug into myself. And it gives you a lot of good tools and strategies of what to do, when to do it, and really connect you with you. So I hope that you guys enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. And thank you so much, Mike, for being here. Zindaji, good to see you. And everyone else who popped in, thank you so much. Attention is the greatest form of currency, so I really appreciate that. And I will see you guys tomorrow. I have the schedule up, and so I'm going to be looking at keeping up with a better schedule for you guys. Anyways, have a good day. Bye.